Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 340. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. A lot to talk about on today's show, including increasing tensions on the Korean Peninsula, and of course, we have a new deployment of American troops just miles from the Ukrainian border, and their commander says they're preparing for war tonight. So, very concerning. Be sure that you are sharing this show. You can find it at the Libertarian Institute, on the blog at antiwar.com, YouTube, Rumble, and Odysee for the video version of the show. It's up anywhere you can listen to podcasts. It's also on the Libertarian Institute all podcast feed. And you can support the show by doing your CBD shopping with Paloma Verde. Paloma Verde, CBD.com. The promo code is PEACE. When you use that promo code, you're going to save 20%, and the show is going to get a kickback on that sale. So it's a great way to help out yourself and to help out your favorite show. I recently re-upped, my products with Paloma Verde. Of course, as I always say, my very favorite, my recommendation for everyone is the sports cream. I've been a little bit more active recently, so I feel like I kind of need it less often. I'm feeling less sore just because I'm doing more and more often. But, when I do get sore, it sets in and it really slows me down. A couple days ago, I covered my back in that CBD sports cream. I did a little stretching. Today, I feel absolutely fantastic. It's like 3 days later. Highly recommend the sports cream. Also, for the first time, I tried out their massage oil. I think it's the last of their topicals I've tried. And just like everything else, it works fantastic. Really good. The sports cream, I think, is more of like a morning regimen, where the massage oil, because it is oily, you're probably going to want to do it towards the end of the day or something like that. But anyways, Paloma Verde, CBD.com, promo code PEACE. Now let's get into the episode. I want to start off with two articles that I wrote for the Libertarian Institute on the escalating military tensions in the Korean Peninsula. And then I also have a couple other things to say about Korea before I move on to the Russia stories. The first story is from October 13th, which is almost 2 weeks ago now. North Korea tests missile, South Korea scrambles fighter jets. Amid soaring tensions on the Korean Peninsula, Pyongyang and Seoul engaged in another round of provocations. Again, this was Thursday, the October 13th. North Korean warplanes flew near South Korea's border, while Seoul conducted artillery drills and scrambled fighter jets. According to the North State media, that is KCNA, Pyongyang engaged in aerial military drills in response to artillery exercises by South Korean troops. Roughly 10 North Korean warplanes flew within 12 miles of the demilitarized zone, the DMZ, and just 7 miles from Seoul's territorial waters. South Korea responded by scrambling an undisclosed number of military aircraft, with the country's Air Force saying it conducted emergency sorties with superior air forces, including F-35As, and maintained a response posture while carrying out proportional response maneuvers corresponding to the flight of a North Korean military aircraft. Pyongyang followed the aerial maneuvers by firing a short-range missile into the sea. The Korean People's Army said the military activity would send a stern warning to the South Korean military, indicating military tensions in the front line with reckless action. North Korea frequently conducts missile tests in response to American war games in the region. The flights near South Korea's border are rare. Military activity on the Korean Peninsula has rapidly increased over the past year after the period of demilitarization. U.S. President Joe Biden and his South Korean counterpart, Yoon Suk-yeol, have abandoned their predecessors' policy of engagement with North Korean Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un. Earlier this year, the U.S., Japan, and South Korea signed a joint military pact to increase military ties, while Washington and Seoul recently conducted live-fire war games for the first time in 5 years. Moreover, Japan, South Korea, and the U.S. have conducted trilateral military drills, and then that was last week. That was like the first week of October now, so almost 3 weeks ago. North Korea has carried out a record number of missile tests in 2022, which come after a multi-year hiatus following a series of meetings between Kim and former President Donald Trump. Then the next North Korea article I have was from a week later on October 20th, so this is a little bit more recent. DPKR, that's North Korea, or DPRK, responds to South Korean war games with artillery barrage into sea. Seoul kicked off its annual war games on Monday, prompting Pyongyang to conduct over 200 rounds, or fire over 200 artillery rounds towards the South Korean maritime border in retaliation. American forces are taking part in the exercises. Dubbed Hoyuk, the South Korean war drills will run for 12 days and end on October 28th, so they're ending later this week. Seoul claims the drills are designed to help it master both wartime and peacetime missions performance capabilities by countering North Korea's nuclear, missile, and other various threats. Last Friday, before South Korea began its latest round of war games, North Korea denounced the exercise and fired about 500 artillery rounds, as well as a short-range missile into the ocean. We discussed this in the last article. Pyongyang followed up that barrage by firing off another 250 projectiles on Wednesday, with North Korean state media reporting that the aerial drills conducted threatening warning fire towards the East and West Seas as a powerful military countermeasure. Military activity on the Korean Peninsula has significantly escalated in recent months. In August, South Korea and the U.S. conducted joint live-fire war games for the first time in 5 years, while North Korea tested a record number of missiles in 2022. And then I talk here again about, look, if you look from 2018 to 2021, you have Trump, and more importantly, I think you have Moon Jae-in as the president of South Korea, and the two of them together actually sit down, they work on, for the Singapore summit, that first agreement in 2018, not agreement, that first meeting in 2018, I think there's a real sense that diplomacy is put on the front burner, that the Americans and the South Koreans are willing to make a deal that the North Koreans are willing to accept, and things start moving forward. Obviously, Trump then hires John Bolton, who destroys everything at the Hanoi summit, but even throughout the rest of that administration, both Trump and Moon, who again is no longer in power in South Korea, it's now Yoon, make overtures to Kim Jong-un several times. They meet at the DMZ in 2020, and this is enough, along with the U.S. and South Korean scaled-down war games, to keep North Korea committed to their missile freeze and, carrying out less military activity of their own. The Joe Biden White House, however, has largely put North Korea on the back burner as it devotes massive resources to Ukraine's fight against Russia, but has nonetheless called on Pyongyang to give up its nuclear weapons, echoing demands made by previous administrations. Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un previously rebuffed an American offer to hold talks on those terms, deeming it a non-starter. In response, Washington said it would, provide sanctions relief and stuff to North Korea. But as we've seen in the past, like with Iran, we can't expect the Americans to uphold their deals. The other thing I think is really important on this, and we're just getting early details out about this, but Monday morning Korean time, so it's probably like 12 hours since I'm now recording this, but there were some warning shots fired around the maritime border between South and North Korea. Now, I think this is a little complicated because I don't think that border is set very well, and so I'm not sure if this is a misunderstanding situation that escalated to military terms because of the current tensions on the peninsula, or if this was meant to be a provocation by one side or another. All right, probably the most important article I have to talk about today, I wrote for antiwar.com on October 23rd. 101st Airborne deployed to Ukraine's border, ready to fight tonight. The White House has deployed thousands of American soldiers just miles from Ukraine's border to prepare for war, according to CBS News. Officers speaking with the outlet recently traveled where they were revealed they were ready for combat against Russia. Brigadier General John Lubis confirmed that nearly 5,000 troops, I think the actual number is 4,700, from the 101st Airborne recently joined the 100,000 American troops already deployed to Europe. Lubis described his troops as being on full deployment, and they are prepared to fight Russian soldiers in Ukraine. This is not a training deployment. This is a combat deployment for us. We understand we need to be ready to fight tonight, he said. CBS reporter Charles De Ega was embedded with the American forces as they conducted military drills at a forward operating base within 4 miles of Ukraine's border. The 101st is engaged in joint exercises with Romanian forces, simulating Ukrainian soldiers' combat against Russian troops. Colonel Edwin Mathidas said his forces have been closely watching the Russian soldiers, building objectives to practice against, and conducting war games that replicate exactly what's going on in Ukraine. CBS News reported Russia's goal is to cut off all Ukraine's access to the sea, leaving the country and its military forces landlocked. CBS News did not provide a source for that assertion. The Kremlin has publicly said its war goal is limited to eastern Ukraine. Now, on this show, I have said that my opinion, and I said this from February when Russia invaded, that when Russia invaded, they would take Odessa and cut Ukraine off from the Black Sea in order to create a state in Ukraine that Moscow does not believe it could threaten this. Now, maybe, the initial war plans were different than the current ones. Maybe that was never a part of the plan. Maybe the Kremlin has had to scale back their plan because of how the war has gone, seemingly not as well as they would have hoped. But, for whatever reason, that was my initial interpretation. That is what CBS News is important here. So I kind of do, I think in this article, take a shot at CBS News for just throwing this line out there. Because whenever I say it, I do say that this is my opinion. And I always break down and talk about the state of opinions of Russian officials like their foreign minister Lavrov and others who have said that the Russian war games are limited to the east, the Donbass region. Now they've obviously recently annexed 4 additional territories, and we knew the Donbass, Donetsk and Luhansk. We knew part of Zaporizhia, this territory around the Sea of Azov. The Sea of Azov is going to be a Russian lake from now on. I don't think Russia's going to give back that territory. That was going to be Russia, but the Kherson and other regions that they annexed suggest that maybe it's the Russian ambitions a little bit more than we've heard from Kremlin officials so far. Lubis declared the division was ready to defend every inch of NATO soil. However, Moscow has never threatened to invade a NATO country. Ukraine is not a NATO member. When President Zelensky said Ukraine should be allowed into the North Atlantic Alliance last month, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and Secretary General of NATO Jens Stoltenberg rejected Kiev's proposal. The 101st Airborne is a light infantry division. It carries the nickname the Screaming Eagles, as the Pentagon utilizes the 101st that can deploy around the world within hours. Lubis described his division as bringing a unique capacity from air assault capability. We're a light infantry force, but again, we bring that mobility with us for our aircraft, for our air assaults. Romanian Major General, I'm not going to try to pronounce his name, told CBS News that the presence of American troops was reminiscent of World War II. The real meaning for me to have American troops here is if you were to have allies in Normandy before there was any enemy there. The 101st Airborne has not deployed to Europe since the last World War. All right, so, this is really huge, these forces being there. And I think, the article kind of says it all. But I'm sure that the Kremlin has real concerns and a real reaction to it. Now, interesting, we get a series of calls from the Russian defense minister to his counterparts on Monday after CBS News put out that report. Now, one thing I should say from the CBS News report, it wasn't at least clear to me how long those troops have been there. It sounds like that they were deployed fairly recently, but I'm sure Russia has known that they've been there for as long as they've been there. But this article from October 23rd at antiwar.com, Russia Defense Minister calls counterparts to warn of coming false flag. Russia's Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu held a flurry of calls with other military chiefs to warn of a nuclear false flag that would soon happen in Ukraine. The calls between the Russian defense minister and Secretary of State our Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, was the second call between the 2 and 3 days. The Kremlin said their defense minister held calls with Austin, UK Defense Minister Ben Wallace, the French Defense Minister, and the Turkish Minister of Defense. Moscow provided few details about the calls. TASS, which is like a Russian state media outlet, reported the calls were to convey Russia's concerns over possible provocations with the use of a dirty bomb in Ukraine. The calls between Austin and the defense minister are the second in 3 days after the defense chiefs went several months without talking. I believe the last call was May 23rd, and then before that they actually hadn't talked since prior to February 24th. TASS reports Friday's call was initiated by the U.S. The Pentagon said Sunday's call was a follow-up conversation requested by the Russians. The Department of Defense readout said Secretary Austin rejected any pretext for Russian escalation and reaffirmed the value of continued communication amid Russian unlawful and unjustified war in Ukraine. And so from the Russian Telegram channel, they put out statements for the meetings with the UK, French, and Turkish ministers of defense that all sounded very similar, basically just saying that the situation in Ukraine is rapidly deteriorating and there's a potential of a nuclear device being used, a dirty bomb, right? With the U.S., the call with Austin, I really didn't see anything other than Russia just acknowledging that the call took place. We got a little bit more information from the American side, and it sounds like, the Russian Minister of Defense said something similar he said to his other counterparts, Wallace, etc., because of the statement we got from the Pentagon saying that, that they don't trust the Russian claim that there's going to be an escalation. Meanwhile, Ukraine's President Zelensky called for Western strikes on the Kremlin. In an interview with Canadian media on Sunday, the Ukrainian leader said if their message is that there will be a strike on the decision-making center of Ukraine, the answer of the world should be there will be the following. Look, if you hit the street in Kiev where the presidential office is located, there will be a strike on where you are. If you do this, then in a second, regardless of your own attack, there will be a strike on your decision-making center of your state. And so, Zelensky is straight up calling for an attack on the Kremlin. That's pretty bold and very dangerous. So I want to roll back a little bit and talk, this covers that first call between Austin and the Russian Minister of Defense, but more importantly here on Friday, Austin called the Ukrainian Defense Minister and made a very bold promise. Defense Secretary tells Ukraine it will have what it needs to defeat Russia, and I wrote this for antiwar.com on October 21st. The United States Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin held a call with the Ukrainian defense minister. The Pentagon chief additionally spoke with the Russian Minister of Defense. It was the first time Austin spoke with his Russian counterpart since May. Pentagon Deputy Press Secretary Sabina Singh reported Austin held the call with the Ukrainian defense chief on Friday morning. The defense secretary told the Ukrainian the United States continues to work with Ukraine to ensure the country has what it needs to fight the Russian invaders. According to a Department of Defense press release, Singh said the two leaders pledged to remain in close contact. Pentagon spokesperson Brigadier General Pat Ryder provided further details about the conversation. Austin reiterated the unwavering U.S. commitment to supporting Ukraine's ability to counter Russia's military aggression. Washington and Moscow provided limited information about the conversations between their respective defense chiefs. Ryder said Austin emphasized the importance of maintaining lines of communication amid ongoing war in Ukraine. The Kremlin said topical issues of international security, including the situation in Ukraine, were discussed. Since Russia invaded Ukraine in February, contact between any Russian and American official has been infrequent. Austin last spoke with the Russian defense minister on May 13th. The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken last spoke with Russian top diplomat Sergei Lavrov in July, but the conversation was limited to a potential prisoner swap. President Joe Biden and President Vladimir Putin are both expected to attend the G20 in Bali next month, but are not expected to talk in any way. Now, when it comes to talks, the Kremlin says they've been open to talks from the very beginning. The U.S. says this isn't true. This is the other article I wrote for antiwar.com on Friday. Kremlin. Putin open to talks on Ukraine from the very beginning. A Kremlin spokesperson said Vladimir Putin has been open to talks over Ukraine since the war began. Meanwhile, America's top diplomat claims there has been no evidence Moscow wishes to engage in diplomacy. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said on Friday Putin appeared to be much softer and open to negotiations. Ankara has been one of the few NATO members to try to retain some ties with Moscow. Erdogan led negotiations that nearly ended the war in Ukraine in its first months. In July, Turkey and the UN successfully mediated a grain export deal between Kiev and Moscow. Responding to the Turkish leader's remarks, the Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov told reporters Putin, in fact, has been open to talks from the very beginning. The president has repeatedly said so himself. Moscow attempted to initiate talks with Moscow prior to invading Ukraine, he said. Now, I think what the Kremlin is saying and what Erdogan said are probably both true. The Kremlin is saying that, look, we've been open to talks since before the war started. And that is the case. You know, they put together a proposal for America. They sent it to the U.S. They sent one to NATO as well. They made different offers and proposals, and the West pushed forward with treating Ukraine as a de facto NATO member. Then, of course, in March and then into April, there were real talks being hosted by Ankara that almost landed in a deal. We even have heard this from American hawks like Fiona Hill, the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, have both separately confirmed that this happened. And then there's a reporting that says that Prime Minister Boris Johnson traveled to Kiev. Boris Johnson was the Prime Minister of the UK at the time, and actually was the one responsible for, making sure Kiev didn't sign this agreement. Blinken says that we have no evidence at this moment that Ukraine's interested in talks. This doesn't seem to be the case. Now, where Erdogan might be right and might be saying something that is a little bit factual is there could be something here where Putin is now a little bit more amenable to talks. Maybe he's a little bit more willing to make a concession on point or something like that. But, I don't think Erdogan was saying, and this is the way more was reported in Western press, was that, oh man, the talks are only happening, Putin is now willing to talk, which, I don't think is like suddenly a new thing. The last thing to add here is, the Kremlin mentioned this as well, that there was a new statute signed by Zelensky, and this prevents any talks with the Russian government. Now, there's this article by Connor Freeman from antiwar.com on October 23rd, that's just yesterday. NATO's proxy war in Ukraine is depleting arms stockpiles. And Connor has some numbers here that I think are actually kind of important when he talks about Norway has now provided more than 45% of its stock of howitzers. Slovenia has committed nearly 40% of its chains, and the Czech Republic has sent 33% of its multiple rocket launcher systems to Ukraine. He is showing that this isn't just, some PR propaganda to sell more weapons, that these countries really have sent significant amounts of their military stockpiles to Ukraine. Now, this does go to show that the depth of the NATO proxy war against Russia and things like that too. Also, as we've talked in the past on the show, this is going to be a massive boon for American weapons makers for decades to come as countries continue to buy and replace these products as time goes on. Even if the war ended today, I think that would be the case. The EU will provide Kiev with 1.5 billion euros per month next year. This is from Connor Freeman on October 21st. And so, we talked recently on the show how Kiev has actually complained about the European Union not sending aid fast enough. Here they're committing a whole bunch more. And importantly, I think this is probably really adding to this article that I think is one of the more important things that Connor has written recently. As winter approaches, inflation rises, social unrest boils in Europe. And he says, as inflation and energy prices skyrocket in Europe, people across the continent are protesting the war in Ukraine and the anti-Russian sanctions, which have raised costs of living to intolerable levels, the New York Times reported on Friday. This is making the politicians nervous as winter approaches. The resignation of British Prime Minister Liz Truss that just happened this week sent perhaps the clearest signal yet that the political peril awaits those who fail to address inflation and the erosion of living standards, no matter the cause, according to the Times. And so, there's protests going on in a lot of countries. A lot of people are upset with the new elected government of Italy, and so there's a lot of different things going on here. But one thing I'd like to point out is, we talked a lot about trust on the show. That this woman is pretty scary. I think she's one of the real hots. Will Porter wrote a fantastic article for the Libertarian Institute explaining how this is a woman who bragged about be willing to just end the world in a nuclear holocaust. Like, she's like, I'm ready to do it. I could do it. I'll hit that red button and make sure we all die. So we're now seeing a lot of protests. Now, one last article on sanctions here I wrote with Will Porter on October 21st for the Libertarian Institute. Western reliance on nuclear energy technology from Moscow is interfering with U.S. sanctions on Russia, driving Washington to seek alternatives as the U.S. and its European allies aims to decouple from the Russian energy sector. Though Washington has spent months working on plans to sanction Russia's nuclear energy industry, the Joe Biden administration has been unable to find a solution due to its dependence on exports from Rosneft, Moscow's state-run nuclear corporation. The firm is the world's top exporter of nuclear fuel, such as enriched uranium, as well as reactors from nuclear power plants. Biden's climate change initiative calls to develop a new generation of small nuclear power plants in order to get away from non-renewable energy sources. However, Russia is currently the sole power of fuel provided used by the new reactors, forcing the Department of Energy to mull using its weapon-grade uranium stockpile, typically reserved for nuclear warheads. While a top Russian executive and another Russian nuclear energy official were set to speak at an IAEA, that's the International Nuclear Watchdog meeting that was set to take place, I believe, this coming week, they have been dropped from the event, and little explanation as to why remains. I believe Bill Gates and another U.S. official are taking their places. The meeting is occurring in Washington. As the U.S. races to distance itself from Russia's nuclear sector, Turkey has taken the opposite approach, recently asking Moscow to build another nuclear power plant in the city of Sinop, far in the country's north. Rosneft confirmed that the two sides are in talks about the project, which it called an attractive opportunity. So, this is one of those things where time and time again we see that we're like, oh no, this nuclear, we had to put these sanctions on Russia and everything like that, but it simply doesn't work. Russia's too big of a part of the world economy. The world economy is too tangled together to possibly just rip Russia off and not have a massive problem with the rest. And that's why we're seeing these protests in Europe. That's why we're seeing these, increasing prices in the U.S. and all these other things that people around the world are suffering with, food shortages and etc. All right, that's where I'm going to wrap up the show today, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. I know things are getting out a little late today. I had an extra day writing for antiwar.com this weekend, so more stories from me, but the show doesn't always get out on time. Appreciate everybody tuning in, doing everything they can to support the show. Please, 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 if you can, share. And if you're interested, right now at antiwar.com, we are holding our fundraiser. I have the brand new antiwar.com sweatshirt on today. It's very nice, really comfortable, top lobster design, really recommended. So, if you just don't want to go donate for free, go buy yourself an antiwar.com shirt. Help us out if you can. Really appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.